So you mentioned kind of healthcare. Do you feel like once the pandemic blows over, will that renewed interest in health tech and these kinds of startups, will that still be there?
Yeah, no, I think what the pandemic has done is really revealed a lot of inequities in the healthcare system and ways in which it was like broken but kind of muddling along. And the pandemic has been a huge stress test on many functions of the economy. And I think there's this sort of sense of, to borrow a sort of presidential slogan, is this build back better, is this the idea of like, okay, we've had this major disruption. We are envisioning how systems should work, but now we're doing it through the lens of equity and accessibility and all of this sort of stuff. So that's a common theme that I'm seeing that isn't really going to go away. I mean, that cat's out of the bag. And so it's not like we're going to forget that huge chunks of the population had difficulty accessing healthcare, and especially like, even when we, sort of get vaccines and it becomes safe to go out and about, it's not like the health effects that were caused by the pandemic are going to go away. There's still will be lingering issues. We will still wind up having to manage vaccine booster shots over time related to, variants and stuff like that. So I think all of these, the revelations of how the system didn't work will certainly stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so speaking of NYC startups, funding, I recently read that funding has just spiked, even just at the start of 2021, compared to previous years. Um, what's your take on that? Why is the NYC startup community finally like thriving?
Well, I think it's been thriving for quite a while. I mean, it's been a long time that New York has been the second largest venture ecosystem in the country. So that's not necessarily a kind of new thing. I'm super excited about the community, but I am also sort of a headline number skeptic. So when you see, funding growth and all of this sort of stuff, it is very different than the experience of the average pre-seed or seed stage entrepreneur, right? And so first of all, those aggregate funding numbers are disproportionately skewed by much larger later stage deals, right? So somebody comes along, raises $250 million, $500 million. That is literally 300 startups basically raising their seed round. And so one or two big deals completely skews those numbers. It skews the aggregate numbers. It skews the gender and ethnicity numbers. And those are companies that were put in the ground, 6 years ago, right? And so what you're seeing on a lot of the aggregate numbers is a result of, a sort of different time period of initial funding. The thing I like to think about more is what is the experience of the founder today who goes out for their first round of financing. And, in some ways, I think that the New York ecosystem is probably a little bit harder for them in some ways than it may have been pre-pandemic, because the one of the best things about New York is our vibrant event and meetup ecosystem, where you can meet a VC by stumbling into any one of the 10 events that are going on any particular night of the week. And now they're Zooms, but it's this very sort of limited interaction. You sort of log into the beginning of the panel, you log out to the end of the panel. There isn't that bum rushing the VC at the end, or riding the elevator up with them on the way to that sort of stuff. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that. So I think it has been a little bit harder to do the kind of break in to the network kind of stuff, which is why I think there's been a huge growth. You just saw On Deck raised a big round but these fellowship groups, these networking groups where people are essentially outsourcing their networking, basically saying, you know what, like I'm going to join a group that's going to instantly connect me to a peer group, because it's relatively hard to do in a work from home world. So I do think there's going to be a lot of excitement to get back to that, because that was one of the best things about the New York ecosystem. And then secondarily, I think the New York ecosystem is largely driven by where people want to live. And man, like I don't think I've ever seen so much excitement about being in New York as people are about being in New York over the summer. Like there is a palatable, I mean, because if anything, I totally get, especially if you have kids, the exodus thing, the, you know, if I can't interact with other people, I want a front yard kind of thing, right? But as soon as that is over, I don't know anywhere else where you'd rather interact with the people, right? As soon as you're, you know, vaccinated and ready to go out and about, um, what other community would you rather be, you know, connected to, interacting with, for any number of reasons, right? Because A, it's not purely a tech community, right? I don't think I could ever live in an industry town where there's like one main thing and you're either like in the industry or you're not. So the way that you know, LA and film, or you know, the Valley and the tech community, or you know, I don't know, Dallas and oil, or you know, whatever.
Or in
So
New
that,
York, it's more like every neighborhood is its own little industry.
yeah, I mean, it's like I have banker friends and actor friends and circus performer friends and you know, media friends and all of that sort of stuff. So that professional diversity, I think, is really interesting, especially in this world of applied tech, where it's not just that I'm building a database, but I'm building something for a particular community, fintech, healthcare, media, you know, what have you. Um, I also think that, you know, look, most startup entrepreneurs skew younger, skew more liberal on average. And so, you know, for as much as, you know, there's excitement about, you know, some other ecosystems, right? Like I cannot imagine living in a city or state where, you know, my legislatures are, you know, taking away voting rights, or all of that sort of stuff, right? I mean, that's, you know, really sort of problematic. And so I think for that reason, I think New York is, you know, a good place to be, where you could sort of at least trust that most of the laws that get created are ones that are, you know, promoting equality and accessibility and all of this sort of stuff. And then I think lastly, um, New York is a very hackable city, in the sense that, you know, there are places to live that are more reasonable from a housing cost. I mean, look, it's still incredibly expensive relative to some other places, but the subway can get you places. You don't have to live in the West Village when you live in New York, right? You can live in Astoria or Sunnyside and Queens and still, you know, get to where you need to go pretty easily. Versus, you know, I look at the Valley, and if like if you don't live in San Francisco proper, socially you're kind of off the end of the earth a little bit. I mean, you know, there's a growing community in Oakland and in a couple of other places, but I mean, it is not the most accessible place to be in the world.